From Michael Bisping's career-limiting fatal injuries to both eyes, to Tatiana Suarez being unable to fight for 3.5 years. Here's a rundown of fighters whose careers were ruined by injuries. Now first, it's Cain Velasquez. There was a time that this former UFC heavyweight reigned supreme in the octagon. In fact, he seemed to be the greatest heavyweight fighter around. But it's how they say, all good things come to an end. As his career progressed, injuries began to take hold of this fighter. Velasquez lost his UFC title twice, and both those times, his injuries were as much a part of it as he was. Even though he won the UFC title by beating Brock Lesnar in 2010, he couldn't defend it for over a year because of an injury. And when he did return, it didn't quite go as planned, and Cain ended up losing to Junior Dos Santos. Following that, Velasquez managed to remain healthy for a couple of years, and that totally worked out because he won the title back. But he only defended it twice before a knee injury began to trouble him, and it kept him out of the cage for a good 18 months. And his return turned out to be anticlimactic too.
I have never seen fear in the eyes of the beast incarnate like I have just now.
Because he lost the title to Fabricio Werdum. After this, Velasquez was never quite able to regain his health. And although he did win against Travis Browne in 2016, only 2.5 years after that, he had his final fight, which he lost to Francis Ngannou. And if you think that's a sad ending to a powerful start, strap in for the next one because it's Brock Lesnar. Lesnar was a force to be reckoned with when he appeared in the UFC in 2008. It took him just 3 fights, and he was able to win a title and become one of the division's most prominent stars. His sheer strength and wrestling capacity made him a threat to the UFC heavyweights. But soon, Lesnar began struggling with diverticulitis, which is a digestive disease that targets the large intestine. And because of it, Brock was only able to fight once in 2009. After losing the title to Cain, his illness came back and left him unable to fight for yet another entire year. His attempt to return following it was against Alistair Overeem, but it was a lost cause. Clearly, the body had kept score. He retired from MMA in 2011, but came back in 2016 for UFC 200. Lesnar defeated Mark Hunt, but the victory was overturned. This time, it was a different beast altogether. He had tested positive for a banned substance. Brock then retired for a second time from the MMA in 2017. He later claimed that he began resorting to substance abuse because of the immense wear and tear his body had endured. His time in the WWE was also marred by this.
Brock, congratulations. Tremendous victory. Tell us about the first round. It looked like you were in trouble. What were you thinking? I'll sell it on eBay.
Moving on, this next fighter's injury will make you flinch just hearing about it. Michael Bisping. This glorious fighter couldn't be brought down in a fight. Ultimately, it was his eye injury that led to the end of his career. In a 2013 fight against Vitor Belfort, Bisping suffered a detached retina. Oof. And can you believe this guy? He didn't even let that stop him. Michael took the injury and the knockout loss and came back to win the UFC title in 2016. Now that's some commitment. Bisping continued to remain committed to his career. In fact, he was one of the most active fighters in the UFC, and he never slowed down enough to give his body a chance to recover, and it began going downhill. The former UFC middleweight champion fought Kelvin Gastelum several weeks after losing his title to Georges St. Pierre. He lost the fight with a knockout, and unfortunately began having trouble with his other eye, which hadn't previously been injured. This was probably the last straw for Bisping, and he retired from the sport soon afterwards. Now this next fighter's battled his fair share of injuries, but he really kept coming back stronger. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now the dominance of Khabib in the octagon is unquestionable, but his injuries often got in his way during his UFC tenure. But even for all of that, he retired from the sport in 2020 as a champion. At the time of retirement, Khabib had 29 wins and 0 losses, and out of all these, only 13 fights took place in the UFC. The really bizarre thing was that he'd been in the UFC for almost 9 years, and in that time, he fought only 13 times. That's kind of low, and much of his absence could be attributed to injuries. This guy sure got as good as he gave, because at one time he was injured for 2 whole years after his fight with Rafael dos Anjos, the former UFC lightweight champion. But injuries could not alter the quality of Khabib's techniques. I mean, his career has got some pretty impressive wins. He beat the likes of Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, and Justin Gaethje. This level of performance poses an interesting what-if scenario. Can you imagine what it would have been like if Khabib hadn't been injured so often? there would have been a lot more jaw-dropping fights for sure. And speaking of what-ifs, this next fighter totally bounced back to silence all such thoughts. Tatiana Suarez. Undefeated fighters have a special place in the hearts of fans, and they eagerly await updates from such champions. Now, Tatiana kind of just abruptly stopped fighting after 2019, even though she remained on the promotion's roster. And with 2023 in sight, the fighter remained absent. She was clearly a star in the making, and in just her 7th fight, she had out-wrestled the former strawweight champion Carla Esparza. But the TUF 23 winner's career took a bit of a bump when she suffered neck and knee injuries. She was expected to make an appearance in 2021 at UFC 266, but in the end, Suarez was pulled from the event due to injuries. Just when people began thinking that a promising performer had burned out, Tatiana returned after a 3.5-year break.
Yeah, it's just been really bad, but I thought it was good going into the fight, and it was good for a little bit, like the first couple shots, and then I think one of them I really messed it up.
At UFC Fight Night 266 in February 2023, the fans finally got what they had been waiting for. Suarez faced Montana De La Rosa in a flyweight bout. The outcome, you ask? Well, Tatiana totally dominated. She won the fight in round 2 with a guillotine choke submission.
At 2 minutes, 51 seconds of round number 2, declaring the winner by submission due to a guillotine choke, Tatiana Suarez!
The remarkable win also got her the Performance of the Night bonus. Let's hope we see more of this powerhouse in action. Not everyone comes back with such strength, though. This next fighter sure took on the fight challenge, but he paid a heavy price. TJ Dillashaw. Now, you might remember what went down with TJ at UFC 280. It came to light that the former champion had dislocated his shoulder about 20 times while training for the bout. I mean, that's 20 times too many, y'all. Knowing that he'd gone ahead with the matchup, thinking that such an opportunity was hard to come by. And so at UFC 280, he was up against Aljamain Sterling. And during the fight, Dillashaw seemed totally ineffective. And to make matters worse, he re-injured his shoulder, while Alijo was totally in the zone. TJ was all but dominated by his formidable foe. And it all ended with a TKO loss for Dillashaw. Afterwards, though, the fighter's decision to keep the UFC doctors in the dark about his injury drew backlash.
Probably dislocated a good 20 times throughout training camp. This is by far the toughest training camp I've been through because of that, emotionally, you know. That's why I was talking to about his weak stand-up, because I didn't want him to wrestle, man. I knew that was the case.
The event also made headlines. Following the whole thing, TJ underwent surgery on his shoulder, and after finding out how long recovery would take for him, TJ decided to bow out and retire from MMA.
Unfortunately, the second round, you know, I couldn't push up off my shoulder, so hats off to Aljamain for doing what he does, and great win, you know?
And that was everything on fighters whose careers were ruined by injuries.